Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Week 18 is here, and our Week 18 content is going to look dramatically different than what you've become used to. The number one reason for that is because, yes, we have a lot of matchups that still could play out where things could be different, you know, in terms of having a playoff spot, not having it, seeding being a little bit different. But there are a lot of teams also in a position where if they get a pretty decent sized lead, I think we're going to see guys start to come off the field here in Week 18. So the whole goal for this week is not to dissect every matchup like we normally do, but to really focus on the guys we feel offer you the least amount of risk to put in your lineup this week. So we're going to have three different categories in terms of riskiest to non-risky, and we'll go through every single one, and we'll kind of talk about the players that we feel fall into each category, and we'll go from there. But hit the like button for me, subscribe if you're new here to the channel, and let's hop right into it. And our first guy up is going to be Dalton Schultz. And just a quick reminder for everybody, these are not rankings. So just because you see guys popping up on the screen in a certain order does not mean I have them ranked that way. The rankings will come out later on in the week, just like they normally do, so we can update you on different things that may be happening. But in terms of the least risk category, these are the guys that I'm going to go with this week. Dalton Schultz is going to be one of the first ones up. Playing against Washington this week, Dallas can still win the East and take the number one seed. I definitely think they're going to come out raring and ready to go and firing the football around, and hopefully Dalton Schultz, you know, he might not have as big as a week as we saw last week, but hopefully we still have a pretty decent week. Now, Washington does allow the fifth fewest points to tight ends, so maybe his upside isn't nearly as what we would hope it to be, but we should still see him on the field for the entirety of the game. Evan Ingram, playoffs on the line, and I don't have any worry about Trevor Lawrence sitting this week like we saw last week. Tennessee allows the third most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. I expect Evan Ingram to have himself a pretty decent week. Travis Kelce is going to have no risk for me this week. Kansas City, they're still fighting for the number one seed, so I would anticipate them also having all their starters out there, and of course, Travis Kelce will get all of those targets. Juwan Johnson from New Orleans. Now, they're not playing for anything against Carolina, but they're still playing for respect, and that would be it. 7 targets last week, led this team, and he had 62 yards on 5 receptions, so still not a bad week overall for Juwan Johnson. Dallas Goedert, I mean, things are getting bad for the Philadelphia Eagles. They went from basically locked into the number one seed to all of a sudden fighting for not only the one seed, but their division at this point. Because if Philadelphia were to lose and Dallas were to win, Philadelphia goes from being the 1 seed to the 5 seed. They go from having a playoff bye to being in the first round, from having home field advantage the entire time to having to play on the road. That is going to be a pretty tough deal for Philadelphia. I highly anticipate everybody being out there, including Jalen Hurts, really getting himself ready to go this week. Maybe it ends up being a risk for Hurts, but at this point, based on the way they've played the last couple of weeks, if Jalen Hurts can even be 3/4 of what he normally would be, I see him out there this week. George Kittle is going to be in a smash spot this week. Arizona allows the most fantasy points to tight ends. He's got 5 touchdowns in the last 3 games. San Francisco still has a shot at the 1 seed, so I anticipate them sending all their guys out there. And the way the schedule falls when they're playing, they won't have any idea whether or not they actually do have it. So I anticipate them having everybody out there. Darren Waller, this is another statement game for Las Vegas, you know, coming up here. I mean, this is a team, especially when you take a look at what, you know, especially when you take a look at what McDaniels has done this season. You know, he wants to end the season on a good note. This team wants to end the season on a good note. Jarrett Stidham coming off a really good performance. He's going to want to end the season on a good note. He doesn't want everyone remembering, oh yeah, he had a great week in week 17, but he bombed in week 18 against Kansas City. We know that they're going to have to throw the football, and we know Kansas City is going to come out ready to play as well. TJ Hawkinson from Minnesota, he had another 12 targets last week. And that was the highest on the team by 5. The one concern about TJ Hawkinson is that they do maybe rest their starters later in the game. But Minnesota is not going to want to roll into the playoffs with back-to-back losses to division opponents. If they were to go up huge on Chicago, basically the way that Detroit did last week, then maybe we start to lose some of those guys late third quarter into the fourth quarter, but they should come out raring and ready to go at least in the first, the second, and after halftime. The hope is that TJ Hockenson gets his volume before then. And the reason TJ Hockenson is still a green here, a number one on the risk scale, is because I think he'll get enough targets leading into it. And at the tight end position, honestly, even if he plays for 3/4 of a game, who's going to have more targets than TJ Hockenson will in a full game? So that's the reason I'm still going to go with TJ Hockenson this week. Tyler Higbee's an interesting one for me last week. I do know that he had a bad game. However, he gets Seattle now. That allows the second most fantasy points. Los Angeles is playing to knock Seattle out of the playoffs. When this game happens, Seattle kind of controls their own destiny. If they win, all they have to hope for at that point then is a Lions win later in the night. Because if they win, that knocks the Lions out no matter what. If they lose, they're basically going to be done at that point. They're done and out because either Green Bay or Lions, who both are playing each other, winning will take them out of the equation. So they have to win to get in. So Seattle's going to have all their starters out there actually with no issues. The Rams, for me, they're going to come out raring and ready to go because they can't make the playoffs, but they want to knock somebody out. And knocking their division opponent, I mean, that doesn't have any better. That's second best, actually locking up a playoff spot if I had to guess for them. Pat Freiermuth, there's still some hope. He's the top target on the team. They have an outside shot at the playoffs as well, so everyone's going to be out there. They're going to play their starters, and Pat Freiermuth is the number one target on this team. Let's jump into some guys that are kind of right in the middle of the risk scale for me. Dawson Knox is going to be kind of the first name to kick all this off. I don't know, and I hate to even use this as part of my analysis here, but it's hard to know how Buffalo is going to play this coming week. They've rightfully so had a very difficult week. They still don't know a whole lot about their teammate, even though things are starting to trend up for him. And they're going to have to turn around and try to play this week. Unfortunately, their mindset is probably not going to be fully on the game, and it makes sense why. So for me, there is a little bit of risk with this team just because there is the possibility that they come out and they're just a little bit down. And if they are, they're more than welcome and entitled to that. And this is not me trying to downplay that situation. And it made me feel sick even kind of using that as part of my fantasy analysis here. Trust me, I didn't like doing it. If you don't like hearing it, I apologize. But I wanted to at least bring it up because I think it is kind of a part of the equation in terms of what Buffalo team are we going to see this week. Now, on the flip side of that, they could come out and say, we got to win for Damar Hamlin. We need to finish this thing off for him. They fire on all cylinders and they have an absolutely great game. So I think there is just a little bit of risk there in terms of what we see for them. But for them, it's about A, knocking New England out of the playoffs, and B, trying to, potentially still firm up that number one spot and a bye in the first round. Taking a look at Trey McBride. I mean, he would have been normally a 3 for me, but I know coming off his game last week, y'all would have wanted to know why. We still don't know about DeAndre Hopkins, and we still don't know who is going to be the quarterback. And San Francisco does allow the 8th fewest fantasy points a game. So there is a lot of risk here. If Hopkins plays, Trey McBride falls down to a 3. If Hopkins doesn't play, then Trey McBride probably stays right here in this area, and you have to hope for enough targets. Right after I finished recording this episode, it was announced that Justin Fields is not going to be playing this week, which means that Cole Kmet is definitely a 2, but he's actually going to be closer to a 3 for me and being a very risky start. We've seen Cole Kmet really not do much of anything if he doesn't have Justin Fields there with him. So if you're trying to play Cole Kmet this week, honestly, I'm only looking at him if I don't have some of the other much better options that are ahead of him with potentially safer upside. Taysom Hill, you want to risk it? I mean, go right ahead. You're hoping for that touchdown against Carolina. If he doesn't get it, that's an issue. That is a big issue if he doesn't get it. He's a little bit of a lower risk than Juwan, or he's a little bit of a higher risk than Juwan Johnson, excuse me, because Johnson actually physically sees targets. With Taysom Hill, you're hoping for some rush yards on the ground. And going up against Carolina, I mean, Carolina was knocked out of the playoffs, but I think they're going to be playing for their interim head coach, Stephen Wilkes. I think they want to see him back, and they have really battled hard for him down the stretch. And now that they've been knocked out of it, you could, most teams could be like, it is what it is. But he's fighting for that head coaching spot. He ends the season on a win. That's a good note going out for him potentially getting that job and having the interim tag removed. So for Taysom Hill, it's all about what can he do on the ground. David Njoku, he really hasn't been good for the last several weeks unless he scored a touchdown. If he doesn't score a touchdown, it is tough. But Cleveland is playing to knock Pittsburgh out of the playoffs and ruin their 500 record streak. They've got a streak now of consecutive seasons with a record of 500 or better, and they could take care of that and make them 8-9 this week with a win. Tyler Conklin, for me, Miami allows the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Miami's still playing for their playoff lives. The New York Jets are out of it. But Robert Saleh is a guy that doesn't take anything less than 100% energy from all of his players. And again, when you're going up a division opponent that still has a playoff chance and you have an opportunity to knock them out, I think you're going to give it your all. And then Mark Andrews, the biggest issue here is right now we don't know when they will play. As of this recording, the Baltimore and Cincinnati game has not been locked in. We don't know what time that will be, and that's kind of a little bit of a risk for me because it does put Baltimore in a situation of do they know or not know what their playoff fate is at that point. Now, they can still beat Cincinnati and with some other things happening, potentially work their way in. So I think we see them. But even with that being said, Mark Andrews, outside of his 100-yard game last week, hasn't done anything for a few weeks. So he still brings some risk for me right now. Now the guys that are the biggest risks to this point, and these are only the guys that I thought I would get questions about from a fantasy perspective. Like Michael Pruitt, none of you are starting Michael Pruitt. So I didn't even include him this week. Guys like Chigiooko, no one's starting Chigiooko this week. So I'm not including him at all. So these are just the guys that I thought, all right, these are the riskiest options that I wouldn't play that I think I'll get the most questions about. Mike Gesicki did have a touchdown last week, and we don't know who the quarterback is going to be yet. But even with just one touchdown last week, is that enough for us to jump on the bandwagon? I don't think so. Cade Otton, I mean, the Bucks aren't really going to be playing for anything. I expect to see some of the starters rested. Now they've come out and said that they're not going to, but I don't know how reliable that is. Now their seeding could potentially change based on a few different scenarios. But for me at this point, the Bucks just want to be healthy. I mean, for them to even just get here, who cares if they're 9 or 8 or 8-9? They're not going to care. The only thing they're going to care about is winning next weekend. And guess what? Even with a poor record, they get to host a playoff game. So because of that, for Tampa Bay, what's the point? Don't get anyone injured. Don't get Brady injured. Don't get Evan injured. Don't get Godwin injured. Don't get Otton injured. Don't get anybody injured. You're playing next week with a home game. Just be ready to go for that. That's all that matters. Gerald Everett, LAC, the Chargers don't have much to play for either. Kind of the same thing with the Bucks. Their seating could change a little bit, but they're locked into a playoff spot right now. Okay, so they're good to go. They're going to be a wild card. They're going to play on the road. For me, again, it's all about getting into the playoffs healthy. Just get there healthy, because if you take any type of a serious injury to any of your top players in this game, your season's basically done at that point. I would rather have all my guys healthy than have one extra win in the season. I'd rather be one spot lower in the wild card, because more than likely you're going to be playing on the road regardless anyway. So you're going to play every game on the road except for the AFC Championship. And even at that point, do you really expect anybody below you to be there facing you? So for me, just stay healthy going into that game. So Gerald Everett is a risk. And Hayden Hurst, kind of the same thing for me this week. Going up against Baltimore, he is risky. I mean, when you've got so many guys that have so many opportunities around him, the good thing that we know right now about Cincinnati is that they are still playing for a number 1 seed in that division title. They win against Baltimore, they wrap the division up, which I know that they would love to do. Hayden Hurst, for me, though, is another guy that, yeah, you could get 4 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown, and he could be, but you could also get 2 receptions for 20 yards and no touchdown, and he could ruin your week. So for me, I'd rather take a little bit of a shot with some of the other guys that I find to have less risk with them, just based on the fact of the guys that they have around him right now. But hey, this was a little bit of a different feel to the start and sit episode this week. This is not something that will continue. We just did a little bit different this week because there was so much up in the air. We wanted to make sure that we kind of put the risk associated with every single player out there. So if you didn't like the format, I'm sorry. It's not coming back unless we do it again week 18 of next year, but you're not going to have to worry about it anyway. This is not something that's permanent. If you did enjoy it, well, then glad we were able to make things a little bit different for you this week to help you make some decisions if any of you are playing for a week 18 championship. Do me a favor on the way out, headliners, hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and make sure you stick around for all of our off-season content. It's going to be an absolute banger this off-season, ladies and gentlemen. I can guarantee that. And leave me a comment down below if you've got any questions, and I'll see if I can get to any of them for you. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great rest of your week. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.